Delighted to be back at Harper Adams. I was their first PhD student back in the 1980s, so if anyone wants to reminisce about times and alumni issues at Harper Adams, we're very grateful for that discussion this evening over a few pints of beer maybe. I have a confession to make. I've had a long career of plagiarising my own PhD's research, and they're very gracious to allow me to do that. I think this is the first time I've ever given a presentation where absolutely none of the data in the presentation is my own. Okay, I've only been director at IBERS since last October, and therefore I've managed two of our worthy professors that would be very much more able to give this talk than I would be here today. But also there are many other colleagues at IBERS whose work will be in this as we go through. But nonetheless, I accept the invitation and I'll go for it. We'll start by a cynical point to make a very nasty word like intensification quite cuddly by putting sustainability in front of it and feel much better about ourselves. But I'm going to refer back to the Royal Society report, Reaping the Benefits, Science and Sustainable Intensification of Global Agriculture, because it did raise an issue that is relevant to this talk. First of all, the background, of course, population growth, wealth creation is increasing pressures on food demand, and that is leading to volatility in prices, and that together with increasing weather variability has made that worse. We're also making the assumption that we're not going to increase the amount of land that we're going to commit to agriculture. This is quite a controversial point.
Of course, if you're a crop scientist, you say this is the way it's going to happen because it's the way it's happened over the last 50 years. There's been some notable exceptions, particularly in Brazil. But there are economists that think that if we get really tight, particularly in the Western world for food, that we would make more land available and find more land to produce from. But we're not in that scenario at the moment. It is a debatable point, but we're assuming that we're not going to massively increase the area of land that's going to be committed to agriculture going forward. And therefore, if we're going to satisfy increasing demand with the same amount of land area, intensification is inevitable. That is a definition of intensification, producing more from the same unit area of land. So let's take that. But what we can't do is to carry on intensifying it in the same way that we've done in the past. Okay? We certainly have threatened the ecosystem on which our food production depends. We have depleted non-renewable resources, we have caused diffuse pollution, we have reduced biodiversity, helpful biodiversity for our crop plants. So that is not an option. We cannot carry on doing what we've done in the past. In fact, we mentioned about the wheat plateau this morning, and we can't just increase the amount of nitrogen to wheat crops because they're already intercepting all the light. There's no point in producing a bigger canopy. We can't carry on doing that sort of reduced height, stature, increasing nitrogen, reduced lodging story. That's been done. Past it, we need other solutions. Okay, the Royal Society report also, the reason why I'm giving this talk, said that we had an over-reliance on annual crops. And annual crops have some recognised inefficiencies. Perennial crops should have better resource capture. They're in the ground all year round. Okay? They are therefore better able to capture nutrients through the soil. You don't have that period of bare grounds where you've got nutrient flows through the soil as the new nascent crop is getting established. You haven't got the issues around ploughing at times of the year when you're releasing nutrients into the environment but not taking them up by the crop. You're intercepting the light for a much longer period of time. So the idea that perenniality is a way in which you increase resource capture, and if you're a legume, you increase nitrogen fixation, is an idea that's been around a long time. It's nice to be able to eliminate the need for cultivation that annual crops require. You can go some way along this road with conservation agriculture, but it still doesn't get you all the way there. So the nitrogen losses, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that, the soil erosion, the damage to soils that we were talking about earlier today, are all associated particularly with annual crops, and there are certain things that perennials can give you if you avoid that. Perennial cropping also allows you to produce food in areas that are unsuitable, maybe for topography, maybe for weather and climate, that are unsuitable to annual crops. There's not necessarily a complete substitution between using grain for livestock and not eating livestock and not utilising, say, grassland that can be using areas where you'd never produce grain. Okay, so grasslands are the foundation for the world's most important food production systems based on perennial species. And of course, the main reason to work on perennial crops is you get to live in beautiful areas of the world. Okay, that is very important. It's a great well-being issue that perennial crops can be grown in very much more interesting areas. This is the Claret Valley, and you're all welcome to come to IBES. This is one of our campuses, and we used to be the Welsh Plant Breeding Station, then it became IGA, and now it's part of IBES. It's very much situated within its community that it wishes to serve. Okay, well, you know how important grassland is. So fantastic, it's a perennial crop, grows everywhere, and very adaptable, many different species, a lot of biodiversity can exploit it, and very important. This is an interesting slide. Who thinks that's a nightmare, that slide? No one. Okay, well, if I gave this slide to my students at IBES, half of them would think that was a disaster, and half of them would think it was near perfection. All right, so you're all assuming it's near perfection in terms of, because you're from the plant biology fraternity. Okay, well, as Guy said this morning, some farmers would see that as a very positive thing, but maybe in restricted areas. A lot of grassland farmers would see that as being a bit of a difficulty. Well, there are a number of ecosystem services that grassland could provide, but obviously it depends how you manage it and how you utilise it. I just put this up. This is from Johnny Johnson and the long-term experiments at Rothamsted. We're talking about the quality of soils. It's absolutely undeniable that the resilience of the soils, even in the UK, which has some of the most resilient soils in the world, has been reduced because of the move and the shift from a permanent agriculture to an annual or a more temperate, temporary agricultural system. And you can see this at Long Ashton. If you have your permanent pasture and leave it in permanent pasture, you reach a high equilibrium of organic matter and carbon in the soil. If you plough that up, you then have a problem of release of carbon from that soil for the next 30 years while it approaches the equilibrium that is arable. Okay, this is old data, it's well known. And if you sow your arable back to your grass, you're on a long-term gain in organic matter. Now, there's a few things to notice from this. One is you are just moving from one equilibrium to the other, but it occurs over decades. Okay? Trying to increase organic matter in the short term is very, very difficult. And the ploughing up and shift from a permanent agriculture to an annual agriculture leaves you with a legacy of loss of carbon, but also nitrate leaching from that soil over a long period of time. And we talk about carbon because it relates to water holding capability, it relates to resilience, it relates to structure, it relates to the fauna and flora of the soil and the biological activity of the soil. There are many other things that are going up and down in the same way other than just soil carbon. Okay. Right, the ruminant in the room, of course, is that grassland can be also a source of great unsustainability because of poor efficiency of utilisation. At one level, of course, mixed systems, especially in an organic context or a low input and extensive system, are much easier to manage if you've got livestock there. So one part of the conundrum is in an extensive system, mixed farming is seen to be more sustainable and more beneficial and more desirable from many aspects than a monoculture or a reliance on total arable or even actually total livestock. At the other extreme, of course, we know of all the problems with the environmental pollution, diffuse pollution that is caused by intensive systems for livestock. In some parts of the world, of course, livestock is your only option of gathering in nutrients from a wide range of poorly productive areas. So in rangelands, we use our ruminant as our mobile harvester and harvesting up nutrients from a large area and therefore making food production from areas that wouldn't otherwise be producing food. But this is a significant issue that we need to address. Right, well at IBES we have some great teams of people that are trying to address just those issues. If we can solve this issue, this is one of the biggest gains that we can make in terms of making intensive agriculture sustainable. Okay, if we can increase the efficiency of the ruminant by the way that we feed and the way that we breed plants for those animals, that is one of the biggest gains that we could make in terms of going forward. And it's not insurmountable. One of the things that gives me great confidence that we can do things like this is because the quality and the type of forage that we give to animals, the traits that we're looking for, aren't necessarily traits that have been under intensive natural selection for the last millions of years. Okay, we're not necessarily trying to increase radiation use efficiency or nitrogen use efficiency. These are traits that are under intense natural selection in the natural world. Okay? But if we're starting messing around with the quality of the grass or the quality of the forage for the ruminant, we're looking at traits that haven't necessarily been selected for in a natural context. So I'm optimistic. Okay, we have a large number of people at IBERS that are pushing forward in rumen systems biology. We have a lot of genomics, but also very experienced crop breeders. And we also have other ways of utilising grass and grassland products. Kerry Farrar is in the audience, and she'll say a lot more about how we can have value-added products from grass, not necessarily going through the ruminant at all. But what we learn about efficient fermentation can be cross-fertilised between these groups, and also that feeds back into the way we breed our grasses. Okay, this is from Mike Humphries. So what we're talking about is combining our genetics and our physiological analysis, not just relying on an empirical approach to breeding, but having targeted breeding, hypothesis testing, idiotypes, traits that we are targeting, and looking forward to improve grasslands, particularly reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, also increasing nutrient use efficiency to reduce diffuse pollution, to increase stress resistance to abiotic stresses, and that issue about trade-offs between yield potential and resilience is a real one which we need to address. And related to stress tolerance is also increased persistency, and we're looking at ways of improving reducing soil erosion and also improving drainage and runoff, reducing runoff from fields. Okay, we have a large number of enabling technologies. We are blessed at IBERS through strategic programme funding from BBSRC and also a great deal of generosity from the European Rural Development Fund. We can do all the omics all the way up to economics if we have to. We do a lot of sequencing. We're heavily involved in the sequencing of perennial ryegrass and also red clover. So we are doing a lot of association genetics. We're doing a lot of sequencing. We're doing when we want to. We're having a go at genome selection as well, just as Chris was discussing this morning for wheat. We also do it the other way, and as Chris would. This is our phenotyping platform. For most crop science departments, the phenotyping platform is a band of ready PhD students and technicians, gradually getting replaced by UAVs and various sensors, but there's nothing quite like actually going through the plots and assessing them in a traditional way. We also have a range of screening systems to improve nutrient use efficiency. We have nutrient flow system, we have lysimeters, we have microplots and swards to assess as well. And also something we could discuss is the use of the National Plant Phenomics Centre. This is a national capability that is funded at Aberystwyth, but it's for everybody. All right, it is for the UK community. BBSRC certainly fund it under that understanding. Fiona Cork is in the audience, and she's got a poster on the National Phenomics Centre, which you can go and have a talk to her. So if you want to work in here with Fiona, please go and see her in the poster session later. It isn't a field phenomics centre, right? It's a plant phenomics centre. So you have to be convinced that what you're looking for and want is expressed and useful on the single plant scale. Okay, and that's an important point. Okay, there are many traits that we look for in single plants that are actually, you'd think would be a good idea, but actually in a community of plants are a bad idea. And grasses is a good one, because even at IBERS, I think 30 years ago, they showed that if you selected for high-yielding single plants, you selected for low-yielding swards. Okay? And what we've done in wheat is we've made individual plants less and less competitive. Okay? And you don't get those big single plants that cover. You get small, shortened plants that you can grow closely together. At least 50% of the increases in maize yield potential over the last 20 years has been breeding varieties that can still produce a decent cob but grown close together. All right? So first of all, if you want to use the National Plant Phenomics Centre, don't use traits that you could mitigate or achieve by increasing seed rate. That's a good maxim, all right? Because most crops are grown at an optimum, often a super-optimal seed rate. And if it's just increasing the size of the canopy, well, why don't you just do that by increasing seed rate? And we already know that we're already optimizing seed rate, so we must have already achieved that. All right, what is it about your single plant that's going to make it look better and do better in a community of plants? So save yourself a lot of time. You're not looking just for big canopies of single plants, all right? Please don't do that. It doesn't work. All right, so what we are interested in are things like rooting depth. Okay? It's very difficult to compensate for shallow roots with seed rate, right? So it's a really good example of the point I've just made. So if you've got a genotypic basis for rooting at depth, and you've decided that you want deep roots for various reasons, that's something that you could use the Plant Phenomics Centre for. Okay, and we can quantify rooting at depth in various ways, and also we can measure water in the soil at the same time and give useful data on that. See Fiona later, I won't say any more about that. Okay, you produce huge amounts of data, and bioinformatics is obviously very important and is well supported at IBERS. At the end of the day, what we need to do is produce products, and I'll just go through some of these very quickly. Very quickly. Right, high sugar grasses. Grasses that have a high water-soluble carbohydrate level, they also tend to have high fructan and sucrose associated with them as well. They give high economic benefit. They increase the live weight gain of the ruminants growing on them. They also reduce the methane production per lamb and also reduce the methane production per kilogram of live weight produced. And we're now getting to grips with why this happens and the understanding of the rumen and how we can match the forage to the biology and the ecology of the rumen. We've shown that we can increase milk yield, but also reduce the amount of nitrogen in the urine at the same time by using high sugar grasses. And these are now available, as many of you will know, on the recommended lists. We do wide crosses. Festulolium, Festuca, and Lolium are very closely related genera. Hybrids occur in the wild. You do get natural hybrids between the two. But by making new crosses with new Festuca with Lolium peren, you can get a high degree of variation in genetic diversity for traits that we require in our grassland. We have wide variation in the amount of roots, so rooting at depth is highly variable. We've got therefore drought resistance coming on board. We've got better nitrogen and phosphorus uptake, and the most important thing is we've got a hell of a lot more genetic diversity to work with reasonably easily. Okay, and these are some of the effects you can get by using hybrids between Lolium peren and Festuca. Okay, we've now just got a new Grant Shaw route which is exploiting those. We have got a variety of Festulolium on the recommended variety lists already, and we've got various interactions now between ourselves, Rothamsted, and the supermarkets and farmers to ensure that we're exploiting the benefits of Festulolium as they come on board. Okay, I'll zip through some of these. This is an interesting one because we get deep rooting at some times of the year. One unexpected effect was that we end up with root channels because some of these roots then senesce, and one of the outputs is we have grants on looking at improving drainage from fields and reducing runoff because we're getting deeper root channels in the field, and obviously a very important issue in terms of Wales. Okay, some other applications are in soil remediation. We do get variation in the degradability of the protein in the rumen, and therefore, again, feeding into methane reductions. Right, and very, very quickly, I don't know who's got the cards, so I'm not, I don't even know. 5 minutes, okay. So, another very important perennial crop for us is miscanthus. We are, again, doing wide crosses, producing hybrids that are producing much larger canopies and plants and crops that we can use for bioenergy than we were doing before. This is some of the variation. We obviously breed very small people at IBAs as well, but there you go. Okay, and we're then measuring the carbon balances that you get whilst you're growing miscanthus crop. And here, we've done a bad thing here, haven't we? We've done a bad thing. We've ploughed up a field of grass to plant miscanthus. So you end up with a net production or loss of carbon from the system for the first 3 years. But after 3 years, you're then in a cumulative deficit and you're sequestering carbon in a productive and useful way. Okay, one thing that we want to do at miscanthus is make it much easier for farmers to use miscanthus, and one of the blockages to utilisation is the cost of establishment, because at the moment it's based on planting rhizomes. So now we have developed seed-based systems that will make it a lot easier for farmers to adopt. And we do have our industrial partners and the Drax power station in place so that we can see our varieties being used to produce energy. Okay, I'm not going to carry on through these slides because we could have some discussion if you want. We're also doing wide crosses with our clover work, so we are heavily involved with the red clover and the white clover breeding, but also we're making crosses with Caucasian clover because it's a more persistent, more drought-resistant species, and we're ending up getting good results in terms of production at low water availabilities. Okay, so it's a similar story, but just to say that it's not all grass. There are other useful plants as well. And I will stop there. Thank you.